Such a cauldron has not been seen since 2014. General Mordvichev is encircling Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, the agony of the Ukrainian armed forces. Good day, dear friends. As always, we are here in our daily format, analyzing the situation on the front lines, reviewing and discussing maps, observing advances or retreats, and drawing conclusions and forecasts about how certain events may ultimately impact the overall situation on the front. Before we begin, I would sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription greatly supports its development. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Now let's begin. Yesterday, President Putin held a press conference where he was asked about the various proposals regarding freezing the conflict or delaying Ukraine's NATO membership for 10 or 15 years. In general, Putin gave a rather clear and specific response. Biden had already made a similar offer back in 2021. And what distinguishes these current proposals from those earlier ones? At that time, Putin rejected the offer, and the special military operation began. Naturally, such proposals are even less likely to be considered now. As I've said before, don't expect everything to end with a snap of the fingers. It won't conclude by the end of January, February, or even March. Personally, I predict that active hostilities will continue until summer. Now, let's move on to the situation on the front. Let's open the map. I believe today it makes sense to talk about the Pokrovsk direction, where movement has started on another section of the front, and overall, the situation for the Ukrainian armed forces is worsening by the day. We must also highlight how General Mordvichev's tactics are once again demonstrating exceptional effectiveness. Let's get straight to the details. First, let's assess the situation. Battles for the village of Volkiye. This is a small village that holds no significant tactical value on its own. However, once it is taken, the road opens up to two other villages, Kotlina and Udaknoye. These are strategically important for two reasons. 1. Both Kotlina and Udaknoye are located along key road and railway lines. If Russian forces manage to capture these villages, both logistical routes, road and rail, will be disrupted, which will immediately complicate the position of the Ukrainian armed forces in Pokrovsk. 2. More importantly, capturing these villages, combined with advancing southward along the Solyonaya River, will allow Russian forces to establish a sizable foothold for a decisive strike in the battle for Pokrovsk, the northern push toward Grishina. The objective is not so much the village itself, but the road leading up to it, namely the Dnipropetrovsk-Pokrovsk highway. This road is critical, as 70% of all logistics depend on it, including ammunition supplies, troop reinforcements, and evacuation of the wounded. If General Mordvichev's forces manage to cut this road, the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses will suffer a severe blow. It won't be fatal, as another road still connects Pokrovsk to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. However, problems are beginning to emerge on that route as well due to simultaneous movements toward the Dnipropetrovsk-Pokrovsk highway and the eastern advance aiming to cut off the road leading to Sloviansk, the eastern flank of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. This is part of the same front, the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Here, the process of forming the eastern pincer to encircle the agglomeration has begun. The approach is calculated, no frontal assaults with massive losses, but rather encirclement and disruption of logistics. Tactics on the eastern sector. The Russian army has started operations from the settlement of Novotoretsk. After crossing the Kozheny-Toretsk River, they established a foothold on the opposite bank. After securing this position, advance units moved toward Mirolubovka and, at the time of this report, reached the southeastern outskirts of the village. Soon, battles for Mirolubovka are expected to begin. If successful and the Ukrainian forces are pushed out, the advance will continue toward Novoekonomiknoye, a key village. Why is it critical? The same issue persists: logistics. This road, which leads to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, passes through it. If the village falls under Russian control, yet another supply route for the Pokrovsk garrison of the Ukrainian armed forces will be cut off. However, these battles are still in the future. By the end of the year, such a breakthrough by Russian forces is unlikely, as serious fortifications have been built in front of Novoekonomiknoye, and taking the village in a frontal assault won't be possible. On a broader scale, the Russian command's intent is becoming increasingly clear: to encircle Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, cut off their logistics, and force the Ukrainian armed forces to withdraw. If they refuse to retreat, the plan is to close the encirclement and blockade the garrison. It's evident that General Tarnavsky, commanding the Ukrainian armed forces in this direction, also understands General Mordvichev's tactics. However, other issues arise, such as a lack of reserves and the poor training of many units. Many soldiers of the Ukrainian armed forces are forcibly conscripted individuals with little to no preparation, leading to poor combat effectiveness. As a result, the Ukrainian armed forces are retreating westward. Even when they launch counterattacks, they often fall into fire traps, as happened with the 3rd Brigade near the village of Peshanaya. They tried to reclaim Shevchenko, but ended up losing half their brigade in the fields. Ultimately, not only did they fail to retake Shevchenko, but they also lost the entire brigade. Russian forces have already captured several streets in Peshanaya, including Veselaya and Molodezhnaya streets. Despite efforts by the Ukrainian command to stabilize the situation in this area, they are failing, just as they are unable to stabilize the situation near Velikaya Novoselka. Yesterday, I mentioned that Russian forces advanced 3 kilometers from Storozhevoye toward a critical supply route, the last road linking Velikaya Novoselka to Gulyai Pole. Overnight, Russian troops covered the remaining 1.3 kilometers and reached this road. The route has now been physically cut off, meaning supplies no longer pass through it. The only remaining options are fields and gardens, which are also under full artillery and drone fire control. As a result, the Ukrainian garrison in Velikaya Novoselka is effectively blockaded, with no more supplies reaching them. Selidovka direction as of December 27th. Fighting in the Interfluve, rearguard battles continue in the area between the Solyonaya and Volchya rivers, where Ukrainian units are slowly retreating to their last defensive line before Dnipropetrovsk. Yesterday, the Ukrainian side acknowledged losing control of the settlement of Ukranka, which we had discussed earlier. Russian forces are advancing toward Yasenevo, reaching its outskirts from both the north and east. Meanwhile, the situation for the Ukrainian armed forces in Novovasilievka is deteriorating rapidly, and the settlement is expected to fall within days. Russian troops are also approaching Uspanovka from the south. Additionally, Russian forces are targeting Nadezhdinka, which is now close to being within reach. They have also been successfully clearing Ukrainian forces from Novoelizavetovka, already controlling more than half of the village. As the Ukrainian command is forced to redirect more and more reserves to the northern part of this front, simply to prevent a complete collapse, the garrisons in Slavyanka and Pervomaiskoye are left without adequate support. As a result, Ukrainian positions there are weakening. It's highly likely that they will soon falter and retreat, which will further exacerbate the problems of the Ukrainian group located south of Kurakovo. The persistence of Ukrainian forces in defending what is effectively a pocket of death near the western outskirts of Kurakovo and further south is striking, not only because of its military futility, but also because of the stubbornness displayed. By sacrificing the remnants of 2 capable brigades, the 79th and 46th, along with parts of other, less effective units, the political leadership of Ukraine is essentially buying time at the cost of their soldiers' lives, simply to delay the inevitable fall of Kurakovo. The Russian Armed Forces Command clearly does not oppose such actions by its opponents. By engaging its units in battles along the entire perimeter of the semicircle, it is slowly but steadily splitting it into 2 parts, isolating the Kurakovo industrial zone, the thermal power plant and pipe factory, from the rest of the area. Taking this industrial zone head-on would entail significant potential losses. Additionally, Russian forces showed movement yesterday toward the settlement of Rozliv. This expansion of the breakthrough base toward Ulakli and Constantinople serves 2 purposes: to establish logistics in the area and to create new pressure points on the Ukrainian armed forces. Ultimately, this should overload the enemy's defensive capabilities at this critical stronghold, which protects the only supply route for the Ukrainian group in the area, leading to the collapse of the front. This, in turn, would transform the semicircle into a full encirclement, with all the negative consequences that entails for the opposing side. Greater Novoselka direction, as of December 27th, Velikaya Novoselka, All roads to the settlement are cut off. In summary, the Ukrainian command's attempts to counterattack using meat assaults with reserves, comprising territorial defense forces and hastily conscripted recruits gathered from Ukrainian cities, did not succeed. Russian forces, without much difficulty, repelled these attacks. On the western bank of the Mokry-Yaly River, they continued advancing and managed to capture several enemy strongholds beyond the road connecting Gulyai-Pol to Velikaya Novoselka. Thus, the last road leading into the settlement has been physically cut off. It is evident that the Ukrainian side will attempt to recapture it, but given the losses from previous attacks and the clear disintegration of their combat formations, it's difficult to see how they could succeed, unless a well-trained, cohesive unit capable of executing coordinated offensive actions appears at the front. Meanwhile, capturing these strongholds poses significant challenges for Ukrainian forces in Velikaya Novoselka. The next well-prepared Ukrainian defensive line is located far to the north and no longer protects this settlement, but instead secures the approach to the Dnipropetrovsk region. For Russian forces, advancing another kilometer up the hill would allow them to establish visual control over the remaining dirt roads leading into Velikaya Novoselka. From this vantage point, they could target vehicles traveling these routes, even with small arms. It is clear that, under such conditions, Ukrainian forces will not be able to hold Velikaya Novoselka for long. That's all I have on the current situation at the front for today.